You know, in 8 years of owning and operating a vintage stereo store, I've made a lot of mistakes. I've learned a lot. I've bought a lot of pieces of equipment that were just unrepairable. And when you, your family, and your employees are relying on you to not make mistakes like that, I think it's pretty natural to start a do not buy or a nope list. And in this video, we are going to look at 7 things that I used to actually seek out back when we first opened that today, honestly, I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. It's going to be fun. Let's get into it. Here we go. This video is brought to you by skylabsaudio.com. We've got hats, t-shirts, stickers, slip mats, equipment from Cambridge Audio, Advanced Paris. It's a great way to support the channel, and I really appreciate everybody that's purchased something from Skylabs Audio. Thanks. I'm sorry, I kind of have some cotton mouth, and I've got a funny story as to why. I give my dog Moo his medicine every morning. And what I do is usually I take my breakfast and I take a little piece of food that I'm eating and I put his pill in it and I set it off to the side. Well, this morning I didn't bother to put it that far away. And sure enough, I finished and I went to look for that piece of sausage to give to Moo, and it was gone. I called poison control, and the guy, he said it happens all the time. He wanted to know my age and my weight, how many milligrams Moo's medicine was. And he's like, you might feel a little bit dizzy, but you're gonna be fine. I'm on doggy meds today, but I think I can get through the video. Console stereos, you remember these? These big, huge furniture pieces that look so cool. It's got everything in one box. You've got speakers, a turntable, amplifiers. Some had cassette decks or 8-track players, depending on when you got it. Some even had reel-to-reels. I've seen some of the receipts from these consoles being purchased back in the 60s, and they were almost the price of a car. I don't think you went into a lot of homes in the 60s and 70s and didn't see a big furniture style console. You'd see them in all kinds of different shapes, sizes, and designs to make sure that they would fit your decor. And a lot of you might not realize that we actually kind of cut our teeth on consoles. It was kind of our bread and butter for the first 3 or 4 years that we were open. We used to service and sell, 4 or 5 of these every single month. It was a big part of what we did. In a lot of ways, we were kind of the only game in town, or really even the 5-state area. We'd literally have people driving from all over the place to either bring us their console for service or to buy one. I remember driving several hours to go get some specific consoles. My favorites were like the RCA Annapolis, the Magnavox Imperials, and Concert Grands. And because I was buying these unrestored or needing serviced, I was able to pick them up cheap. And with the ones of really good quality, we would restore them. And with some that were maybe unrestorable, or we had already bought them with the electronics stripped out, we would put new electronics in them. At one point, before Skylabs was even a business, I went out to my garage and started making them myself. I just loved the design of those mid-century consoles. In my free time after work, I built a couple. And the bummer with the consoles, it's really a lot of things. One, they're huge. If you have 3 or 4 of them in for service, or you're working on a few of them, you need a lot of space, and you need an extra helper just to lift these things. So with space limitations, that became an issue really quick. When people are aware that you service these, rather than call to schedule a drop-off, there were some days where we'd have 2 or 3 people bringing these in and just wanting to drop them off. And I would have to explain to them, we take these in by appointment only because we don't have enough space to store all the consoles. So we would have a constant rotation. Somebody bringing one in, somebody taking one out. The record changers were extremely complicated. Most of them had proprietary cartridges that you couldn't get anymore. A lot of the amplifiers we'd get into were early solid state. They would have germanium transistors, again, unobtainium. And a lot of times you just have to throw your hands up in the air. You'd hit a roadblock either with the turntable or you'd hit it with the amplifier. If you have a console that you're looking to have serviced or repaired, I think the best thing you could do at this point is to join one of the Facebook groups that is focused on consoles. They're really good communities. Post up where you live and see if there's somebody close by that's willing to take a look at it for you. Bose 901s. I remember the first pair of these I bought. I was so excited. I remember the Bose 901s from back in the day, how much everybody loved them. I had only heard great things about them and how unique they sounded, how cool they were. I drove a couple hours away to go pick up a set that needed foam. And with the Series 3, 4, and part of 5, all 18 of the drivers in a pair of Bose 901s need refoamed. And refoaming these speakers is really not that difficult. That is not the reason they are on this list. They are on this list because it seems like the last few sets we did, I'm under the assumption that the owner played those speakers when they needed refoamed, because we refoamed all 18 of the drivers and then found out that several of the voice coils had damage on them. And I've seen this so many times where people will bring in 901s and they'll say, they sound great, there's no problems with them, I just listened to them. And we take the grill off and the foam's rotted. I'm not really sure how they don't realize those foams are bad, because they sound terrible. Any speaker sounds bad when the foam's bad if you give it any level at all. The problem is without that foam centering that voice coil, it causes damage. And you can't figure out if there's damage to the voice coil until you refoam the speaker. So when a customer brings in a pair of 901s to have you refoam, you pretty much have to tell them, I can't test these until we refoam them. So if we refoam them, I gotta charge you for the refoam job, and then we gotta figure out substitutes for the bad drivers, if there are any. And that is the reason why we added the Series 3, 4, and part of 5 to the do not buy, do not service list. You know, another problem with the 901s is they are a little bit more tricky to sell, especially somebody that's just getting into stereo equipment, because you have to explain to them that they either need to use a tape loop or the pre-out main ends to use those speakers because of the EQ. You know, while trying to explain that to some people, you immediately see a glazed look over the face and you know that they're not buying those speakers. And that's a good thing, because for anybody that just wants to keep it simple, it's their first stereo, you might want to avoid the 901s. A lot of times we have people come in, they like the speaker, they're okay with using a tape monitor or a pre-out main in on a receiver that they own, but they don't have one. Once the 2000s hit, they made a lot of receivers that don't have tape loops, and then a lot of the entry-level ones don't have pre-out main ins. And this next one was one of them that I was glad to see go. I mean, I was so over jukeboxes the last time we sold one that I never want to see another one again, and I love jukeboxes. A lot of you that's followed this channel for a while, you're aware that I grew up with a jukebox. I've got a jukebox tattoo on my arm. I think they're a really cool piece of history, but I don't want to touch another one for the rest of my life. I really don't. In the beginning, before I knew better, I think we probably sold maybe 5 or 6 jukeboxes in the first couple years we were open. I'd actually put Bluetooth on them. One, we installed a Sonos Connect. You know, they were great when they ran. The problem is, those things are crazy. They are another level of electromechanical. And unless you really know what you're doing, you do not want to own a jukebox. A lot of them are 400 or 500 pounds. A lot of people want to put them in their basement. So you have to think, anytime there's an issue with that jukebox, you're going to need an army of people to get that thing out of your house. Then the second problem comes up, which is who's going to service it? There's no service centers around anymore for jukeboxes. Before you buy a jukebox, make sure you know somebody that can work on it. And better yet, you want to make sure it's you that can work on it, because it's going to need constant service. I would avoid a jukebox like a plague. I hate to say it, but... And this next one, automatic turntables. This list is actually growing. And it really is because a lot of them are unreliable. When we sell a turntable, I want to make sure that turntable continues to work for the customer for a good amount of time. There's nothing worse in business than having somebody not happy because something you sold them doesn't work in 3 months or even a year. With automatic turntables and the complexity the likelihood that there is going to be trouble with plastic gearing and all those automatic functions, I really am starting to almost completely shy away from them. This is definitely one of those unfortunate ones on the list because there are so many automatic turntables out there from the 70s. If it wasn't for those automatic functions, they'd be great tables for a long time, but a lot of times you can't bypass the automatic function and even make it a manual turntable. It needs those auto functions just to play a record. And it's different if you're a private seller and you're selling an automatic turntable that works just fine right now. You know, if there is an issue in 2 or 3 months, you're not going to end up with a negative review on your business because of it, because you can't service or fix it. I would rather not sell something that has the potential for failure. Leave that to the private sellers. And since we're talking about turntables, we've had a few comments recently asking about linear tracking turntables because we really don't talk about them in our videos. And there's a reason for that. And that's because we don't buy or sell linear tracking turntables. Those have been on the list almost as long as anything. I struggled with a couple linear trackers back in the day when I first opened and it was just me. It was enough to swear them off and say, I'm not doing this anymore. You know, unfortunately, a lot of the linear trackers don't have much value. And I think it's because a lot of people struggle with repairing them. They're a lot of work. A lot of them are. There might be some easy ones out there, but I learned pretty quickly that there's a lot of extra belts. Those things have to be working perfectly in order to track correctly in the groove. So it wouldn't be a good topic for me to cover because I really don't have a lot of knowledge on them at all. And for those of you that don't know, Quadraphonic was a format that was developed in the early 70s. It's kind of the precursor to 5.1. So it's a surround sound like effect where you would have 4 speakers, 2 behind you, 2 in the front, and you would have different audio kind of giving you an immersive experience with your music. There were just a lot of problems. I am no expert on Quadraphonic because this is another one of those that I learned pretty quick. Techs don't like working on them, and most people don't want to pay a hefty repair bill for something that doesn't have a lot of value. The problem with Quadraphonic really was the format.
Equipment manufacturers have been fighting a quad war since 1972, when 4-channel first hit the market. But everyone lost the quad war as the average consumer was driven out of the market.
Well, for a number of various reasons, okay, it's fallen off to the point where we sell almost no 4-channel now.
They had 3 different competing formats. It's kind of like beta and VHS.
It was complicated for the customer that came in the store to buy it, and it was also very complicated for the salesman to explain to the customer what he was going to be getting. The manufacturers could not get together on a single type of 4-channel demodulator.
And it didn't really get solved. The whole idea of Quadraphonic died before they could come to one agreement of which specific form of Quadraphonic they were going to use.
Really was very confusing. I think the typical response was to hold off, okay, to wait. Most people thought, well, someday it will just be one type of 4-channel, like there's just one type of stereo.
And it's really unfortunate because a lot of these receivers, the flagship, Pioneer, Marantz, Sansui, they look really cool. They look like monster receivers. And that was really deceptive because there were actually 4 small amplifiers in one of these units rather than 2 big amplifiers for stereo. You know, you had an amplifier for each speaker, all 4. Whereas a traditional stereo receiver, you would have 2 amplifiers. So a lot of times you see these Quadraphonic receivers, these big, massive, monster-looking receivers, and you're thinking, you know, this is at least got to be 100 watts. And you come to find out it's more like 30. Another issue with Quadraphonic is there's really just not a lot of source material out there. You need a lot of special equipment, cartridges, things like that in order to play back Quadraphonic. And it's really just kind of kept this Quadraphonic equipment from having much value at all. From what I understand, there's still a pretty good demand for Quadraphonic equipment in Japan. But in the United States, you know, these flagship receivers really aren't getting that much money. And jumping on eBay just to see where the market is for Quadraphonic receivers, you know, this Pioneer QX949 serviced sold for $400. And if you think about what $400 will get you with a serviced Pioneer stereo receiver, that's completely different. In my opinion, unless you're really going to dive into quadraphonic, I would just avoid it. Next up, we've got the all-in-ones. And for those of us that grew up in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, I do think we all kind of have a similar story of getting one of these all-in-one stereos for either our birthday or for Christmas. And it really made sense. You got your speakers, your turntable, receiver, cassette, or maybe 8-track player, record player, all in one box. I remember getting 2 of these over a couple of years when I was young too, and I loved it. It was a really good gift for, you know, a younger kid or a teenager that needed their first stereo. You know, spending a ton of money on a receiver and speakers and turntable separately just wasn't in the budget for a lot of people, including my parents. And like everything else, you know, you had some better built ones, and then you definitely had some entry level almost toys. I had a Yorks. I had a Sound Design. At the time, I thought they were the greatest thing ever. I listened to a lot of music on those. The problem with most of them, they were essentially disposable. There's hardly ever any service literature for these out there. A lot of times when people come in and they're inquiring about getting their all-in-one repaired, they usually preface it with something like, you know, this thing has a lot of sentimental value to me. And I get that. And that's what makes it difficult. They don't really care that it would cost a lot of money to fix it. They kind of just want it fixed. And unfortunately, if a technician needs to service the cassette or the 8-track, the amplifier, maybe the tuner needs an alignment, and the turntable, you know, you're talking about 4 pieces of equipment essentially. Just because they're in one box doesn't mean that those aren't independent components. You know, you're really looking at a pretty hefty repair bill by the time you would get through one of those. And by far the biggest bummer on this list for me is reel-to-reel. I say that because I do think it is the ultimate analog format. Unless you've listened to a factory recorded reel on a calibrated deck, there's no way for me to explain how a reel-to-reel sounds or how good it can sound. On top of that, it is still the most expensive format out there. It was back in the day and it still is now. So the idea of going out and buying a brand new reel-to-reel and picking up a couple factory recorded reels on a budget just doesn't exist. You know, these new reels are way out of my price range. Even the factory recorded tapes are really expensive. You know, unfortunately for us analog people out there, most of us are unable to enjoy that format as much as I would want to, and I imagine a lot of you would too. It is different. There's something about tape saturation and the way audio sounds on tape that is just so good. The unfortunate part is there are so many of these decks out there that you can practically pick up for free because they're not working, but there's not a lot of techs that are willing to work on them because they know the amount of time that that machine can take, and it's just not cost effective for them. Again, you've got a really big electromechanical device, and a lot of these need a lot of service. Servicing and restoring a vintage reel-to-reel deck can be very time consuming. That's the biggest bummer on my list of ones that I wish we still serviced. I wish I was still seeking out for resale, but at this point, we just don't buy them, we don't sell them. Just too problematic. Let us know in the comments, were any of these a shock to you? Or did you kind of expect all of these to be on this list? And I've got really great news for everybody out there that's been watching the channel for a while. My dad's back.
Good to be back.
You remembered your breakfast sandwich?
Yeah. I got my drink.
You got your phone?
I got my phone.
Good. You're set for work then.
Yeah. All set.
It's great to have him back. And for everybody out there that sent positive thoughts and prayers over the last few months, I can't thank you enough. I really couldn't be happier having Dad right back where he belongs, hanging out and fixing vintage electronics and just being Dad.